So, how many fights should an amateur fighter have before they turn pro? This is a question I've been asked multiple times, and the answer can be different depending on the situation, for sure. I think it depends, honestly. It's a tough question because I feel like it depends on the style of fighter you are as far as being a striker or a grappler. But I definitely think you need lots of amateur experience. And when I say lots of amateur experience, no, you should not be fighting 20 amateur MMA fights. Amateur MMA fights are the same as pro fights, besides you're not getting paid pretty much. And most of the time they don't allow elbows. But besides that, you're still getting hit the same with little gloves, 4-ounce gloves. You're still fighting without shin guards if it's a sanctioned fight. So I think you should fight. I think before your coach puts you in the sanctioned fights, and this is a very common mistake I see on the lower level MMA scenes, is that I think what happens is someone is a superstar in the gym. They're beating up most of their teammates and training partners, and they'll have two smokers. Smoker being a boxing or kickboxing fight with big gloves, with possibly headgear, and with shin guards. They'll have two smokers, and then because they're the superstar in the gym, the coach wants to turn them into a sanctioned fighter and rushes that process. I think that's a major problem for sure in a regional scene. I think your fighter should have a minimum of depending on the age matters for sure. If the person is older, then yeah, you got to rush that process. If their goal is to turn pro, you have to find a way to rush that a little bit for sure. But if you have a young fighter come to you, they should have a minimum of 10 kickboxing or boxing fights, unsanctioned, like smokers. Unless it's amateur boxing with headgear on and everything, you should have a lot of fights for sure, because those are essentially, a smoker is basically a sparring session. You fight with shin guards, you fight with big gloves. You should have at least 10, if not 20 of those before you start fighting sanctioned fights. And then, I don't think I think that's the smartest way to do it, where you're not risking taking a bunch of damage in actual sanctioned fights. I don't think someone should have 20 amateur MMA fights. I think they should only have about 3 to 5 amateur MMA fights before they turn pro. But I think before that point, they should have, anywhere from 10 to 30 amateur fights, either amateur boxing and kickboxing with shin guards, like smokers, amateur smokers, before they fight sanctioned fights. I have a student of mine that had 22 smokers last year. And now this year he turned sanctioned. He's had 2 sanctioned fights, 2 knockouts. And I think all that experience matters so much. I remember when I fought amateur, when I first started training, I wanted to do MMA, but there was no MMA gym in the town I lived in. So I did amateur. I started off amateur boxing, and I had 20 amateur fights in a year and a half. And with headgear on, with bigger gloves, I believe amateur boxing 12-ounce gloves at the time, and those fights and that experience prepared me so much for MMA. It was just amazing. I remember I would go in there, and I had 5 when I turned into a sanctioned fighter, started fighting sanctioned amateur fights. I had 5 amateur MMA fights in about 3 months, all 5 fights in 3 months. And I remember going in there, and I was just so much more relaxed than these guys. They were scared to death. Some of them probably had 1 or 2 smokers, and then people turned them sanctioned. And they were scared to get hit. They were way more nervous. They had bigger adrenaline dumps. And they just weren't used to someone coming at them trying to knock them out in multiple fights. They of course, if you're doing hard sparring in the gym, then you get used to it to a degree. But nothing prepares you for going 100% when someone's really trying to go hard on you than actual fight experience. And it's another way I feel like I was able to catch guys. I didn't start training until I was 20 years old. There's a lot of guys that have been training their whole life. And so my advice to the kid who comes in now, if you're 18 years old and just coming and just start your MMA journey, you're not young anymore. Like, I think people don't understand that. An 18-year-old's not even young in the sport anymore, because there was an 18-year-old in the UFC this year. So you're an 18-year-old kid fighting in the UFC, and you're just starting. So the one way you can always catch that is just fight consistently. Fight as much as possible, and I think smokers are the safe way to do that. I have another kid that was 13-0 last year at smokers, and I'm not even close to turning him as a sanctioned fighter yet. And people can, a lot of people say, oh, well, it's time for him to fight an actual fight, a sanctioned fight, no shin guards, no headgear. No, the kid's only 20 years old. It's time to get your experience, and by the time he does start doing sanctioned fights, he's going to be so much more relaxed than the purple belt that's been training grappling and only had 2 smokers. He's going to be so much more relaxed than these other guys, that I see he'll have way more success from this style. I think too many guys turn their fighters into sanctioned fighters when they're not ready, and they think, I guess, because maybe this person is beating everyone up in the gym, maybe they're one of the better fighters in the gym, that they're ready to go to sanctioned fights, but then they turn around and start losing. They're not used to the environment. They're not used to, when you've had 20 amateur boxing and amateur kickboxing fights, you're very used to you don't get overwhelmed. You don't have as big of adrenaline dump. But when you take a sanctioned fight, because let's say you're a good grappler, you take a sanctioned fight, and it's the first time you've really dealt with someone. Maybe your coach didn't even put you in a smoker at all. I think that's horrible to do that, because then you're going to go out there, you're going to have an adrenaline dump. You're going to not know how to deal with the pressure unless you've been in the moment. And some people can do that, but it's very rare. It's very rare that someone with very little smokers, amateur striking experience, it's very rare that they can just come in and dominate people in sanctioned fights, or eventually turn pro after a short time period. And I think that a lot of that would be avoided if you just put the kid in more smokers. Give the kid 15 or 20 even amateur kickboxing and boxing fights, smokers with shin guards. You don't have to go get your paperwork done. It's just a smoker's a sparring session, but it simulates a real fight environment, and you still get to walk out. Like, I put my kids in smokers, they get to walk out, they get their music played, their friends and family and fans are there to support them, teammates are there to support them. They get the nervous feel of a real fight, but with the safety of a smoker with shin guards and bigger gloves. And I still believe that's the way to go. I feel like too many coaches nowadays, I don't know if they want to make a name for themselves, or they just don't know what they're doing, but they take a kid who has real potential and they turn them into sanctioned fighters, or they turn them pro too soon. And the kid could have went somewhere if they were moved the right way. And then the poor kid starts losing, doesn't know how to deal with the situation. And what happens is he just loses his love for the sport and just stops fighting and stops competing. When I think if he was moved the right way, that situation could have turned out way different. So my advice would be, fight as many smokers as you can. If you can go fight the Golden Gloves, fight the Golden Gloves. If you can go fight amateur kickboxing smokers, where you just go to a gym and they have a tournament, they say, we're having a smoker, send me your guys, send me the guys in different weight classes. Go get matched up with someone close to your weight. And in smokers, you may have to fight someone a little heavier than you or a little smaller, depending on who it is, but you're fighting with 16-ounce gloves, you're fighting with shin guards in a smoker kickboxing fight, and these experiences really matter. They add up. You get over nerves, you are able to deal with your nerves better. Nothing replaces ring time. Nothing replaces ring time. If someone's been training a lot, like I know guys that have been training half their life, and they'll go in there and lose to a kid because the kid had 15 or 20 smokers, and they're they don't know how to deal with the nerves. They have adrenaline dump. All of this can be broke, and you can break these patterns of them panicking, and you see how they react, and you want to see how they react to situations without the stakes being so high. If you lose a smoker kickboxing tournament, it's not a big deal. It doesn't go on a record. No one gives a shit, to be honest with you. So I just think that more coaches need to move their guys and let them fight more smokers. And especially as long as they're not taking a lot of damage in the fights. If they're like, I was telling you about my student that has 22 smokers last year. He had that many smokers because he wasn't taking damage. But I feel like did a good job of moving him the right way. And I also feel like the majority of coaches that I know would have already turned him into a sanctioned fighter a long time ago, because he's the best fighter he was the best fighter on our team. It's just, it's still, I don't think it's a good long-term strategy. I think a long-term strategy is give your student as many amateur fights with safety, with shin guards, with gloves on, where they can get experience without taking damage, and then all that experience as they go into sanctioned fights or into pro fights will drastically pay off for them. That's just my advice. Let me know what you guys think.